It really is a great time to get into FDM printing, with all the brands releasing super fast and stable Core XY printers. The difficulty really is choosing between them, and within this size and form factor category. So if you'd already decided on maybe a P1P or a K1, let me muddy the waters further by asking you to consider a third option, because this one does some cool stuff and smart things to drive the technology forward. So hi, I'm Ross and this is Fohammer Videos. Straight up, print-wise, this is solid once you get past the small hurdle, which I'll come on to shortly. But this is a really nice and tidy compact Core XY printer, and despite its size, it still has a 220mm cubed print volume, which comparably is the same as the Creality K1 in build area and just 3cm shorter in build height. It's a minimal difference. Setup is simple, just take it out of the box, pull out the foam and undo the bolts securing the build plate. These are the ones with the bright yellow arrows pointing at them. Now it's fast, but it's not the BS quick under 10-minute setup that they claim on the website, because even after all this and you turn it on, there's a 9-minute out of box calibration sequence. Though it's not like I can complain, considering I'm also guilty of misleading claims thanks to my clickbait thumbnails. Now in all honesty, the setup is pretty cool because it's straightforward and it does everything for you. Well, most of the important things anyway, such as leveling and vibration compensation. You just need to add the filament and you're ready to print. And when it comes to filament, you get 250 grams with the printer, and they sent me this really nice titanium blue. I don't normally bother with the included filaments because they're too small, but this was too pretty not to use. Now when you load this in, Flashforge unfortunately have followed the irritating trend of having the spool holder on the back of the printer, and normally this means you need to have access to the back or spin the print around every time you want to change it. But in this case they have left it so that the reel sits slightly proud at the rear and the PTFE tube sticks out of the edge, which means you can actually load filament into it with a generous reach around rather than having to go in from behind every time. Other external features include the ports. You've got the power socket and rocker switch on the back, with the startup button next to the screen, that's sat on the front. And every time this starts up, because it kindly goes into sleep mode when it's not used for some time, you do get a funny little audio chime. Also on the front next to the screen is the lone USB port, and I had hoped, thanks to the printer's rear Ethernet socket or built-in Wi-Fi capability, that I wouldn't need to use this, but I'll get onto that in a minute. Like all printers, this comes with a box of extras, which includes a set of Allen keys, a pokey stick, and you get a 0.6mm nozzle. You get a bottle of liquid glue and some grease for the 3 Z-axis lead screws. And for the USB drive, I actually got a decent SanDisk one too. Now, where Flashforge is moving the technology forward is with this nozzle. It is proprietary to Flashforge, but the benefit is that they've implemented a quick release system, and I have no issue paying a brand for proprietary replacement parts when they add a feature like this, because it is as simple as pull the big red release latches, pull one nozzle out and put another one in. Just make sure you only do this when the nozzle's cold. Now you do get a 0.4 in the printer by default and a 0.6 separately in the box, but a 0.8 and a 0.25 nozzle is available separately. After I did my initial test, which included a test block as part of the out-of-box experience, there was no way I could see you could skip this, and I did a follow-up fidget spinner, which is a test free on the USB drive. I decided to then swap to the 0.6 nozzle and, well, I haven't looked back. The UI of the printer is very intuitive and clean, but you don't have a capacitive touchscreen, which basically means that some buttons require 2 or 3 presses to register because you haven't pressed it hard enough. This is especially true for buttons around the edges of the display. Now the one gripe I mentioned in the intro is bed adherence. This printer comes with a 2-sided textured PEI plate, and they've been smart with this too by adding 2 notches at the back of the heat bed, allowing you to guide it into place easily. And the plastic handle on the front also helps to prevent ouchies for lifting it out when it's still hot after a print. I do find it unfortunate though that there's no smooth plate option despite the plate looking smooth on the website. This is just a personal preference of mine that I've come to love from other brands. But anyway, the problem I had is that I couldn't get anything to stick to the platform after the 2 initial test prints, even when using the included glue stick as an interface. It was only after I swapped to a thicker and stronger glue stick that anything started to be more successful. Now, I'm not sure what the issue here was because I've used this type of plate before without issue, and the initial layers were certainly squishy enough for its successful adhesion. But anyway, they do recommend glue stick, and once I found a decent one, this did work just fine. The largest print I had off this was using the 0.6mm nozzle, and it was actually to create half of a dual AMS riser for my X1 carbons. This showed me that the print result was easily on par with that much more expensive printer which I used to print the other half. And the other thing I created was a new storage case for all of my Switch games, and once again, no issues. Honestly, for practical prints, I'm considering swapping away from 0.4mm nozzles altogether, because this 0.6 was significantly faster. Now, a couple of the final features I want to talk about before we conclude on this is ventilation. Many of these enclosed printers have a removable lid on them, but what I like about the Flashforge is that this is hinged, which means I don't need to find somewhere in my room to put this component when printing soft materials like PLA. But I don't actually need to lift it either. Flashforge actually have another feature which means you can just leave this closed. When printing PLA, the printer will dynamically vent hot air outside of the case, but when printing hotter materials like ABS, the printer will switch to keeping hot air inside of the unit. And that is a super smart design choice. I haven't seen anybody else implement this yet, and all of my prints were in PLA with the lid closed and I had no issues whatsoever. The other thing to consider though is the slicer. You get FlashPrint 5 on the USB stick, but when you open the slicing software instructions file, front and center they tell you to use Orca Slicer. There's 4 pages on this versus the 1 on FlashPrint. So following that, I actually didn't bother with FlashPrint, and since I love Orca anyway, I just went with that. But, and this is where I said I'll come back to that later, the one issue with Orca is that Wi-Fi functionality with this printer does not currently work. I reached out to Flashforge for guidance, but they advised it doesn't currently work, but they are working on it. I did follow up by asking them what the rough ETA is, weeks, months, years, never, but they refused to give me any estimate at all. And whilst talking to them, I also asked what firmware the printer runs on. Not like it matters to me, but people seem to like it nowadays when printers run on Clipper. And their response was, "We appreciate your inquiry about the firmware used in our AD5 series products. However, due to considerations of commercial confidentiality and competitive strategy, we regret that we are unable to publicly disclose this information at this time." Now, when I followed up by asking, "Can you just tell me if it's Clipper or not?" they reiterated that they are currently unable to disclose the information and asked if I would kindly not mention it in the video. So, sorry guys, as I said in my reply, that's not how reviews work. And honestly, I just don't get it. Why the secrecy? Maybe I'm still naive to this level of detail on FDM printers, but surely you can just confirm if it's Clipper, is it Marlin, is it proprietary? Because the people who want to know this as a key point won't buy your printer unless they know either way. If it's your own lockdown software, even if it's based on another, just say it's proprietary software and leave it at that. At least then I'd have something to tell people. Because nowadays this lockdown secrecy attitude is likely to just put more people off, as is the lack of commitment to any target timeframe on the Wi-Fi function. Would it have been that hard to say, we're trying to get it done by the end of the month, or we aim to get it done by the end of the quarter? If we get there and you don't, that's great, but at least tell us what your targets are so we can make an educated decision about buying your products now. So when it comes to this printer, it's not the firmware I actually care about in this review, it is the attitude towards it. The printer works in the most part, and where it does, it works well, and that's what matters to me the most. So there's my 2 cents. But I want to keep talking about what the printer has, and finally the one feature I didn't even realise this printer had is a built-in camera. And this certainly is a popular feature on most modern printers, but this is currently very limited to creating time lapses, and very low, poor quality time lapses at that. You see, due to the lack of a functional network connection, there's no remote monitoring function that I could see, and Flashforge have no app. They do have Flash Cloud, which you can integrate the printer with, but this is just, well, it's terrible. Sorry guys, but it's very beta at best, with a limited selection of poor quality models and some awful slicing and print setup controls. And if it matters to anyone out there, this printer integrates with Polar Cloud, which I just don't see the point of unless you're a school. Honestly though, even then it still doesn't look too great. Honestly, I'd say stay away from both of these platforms, because they take a great looking and solidly performing product like the Adventurer 5M Pro and really just cheapen the experience to the point where they should be embarrassing for the brand when compared to the competition. So all in all, look, hardware wise this is a solid printer, out of the box performance is great, and features like the quick change hot end and the dynamic chamber venting do make this stand out from the competition. But on the software side, they are lacking, and a quick look at their history suggests that quite a few users have had issues with them in this same area before. When I tried to find out what firmware was on this printer, I quickly found previous complaints of Flashforge breaking features of earlier printers with firmware updates themselves, and they had no clear way to downgrade to earlier versions. So unfortunately, where this printer lacks is where Flashforge as a brand have always lacked, and they aren't carrying much favour or consumer trust in this area. So if you're after out of the box good printing, then yeah, grab one of these and be happy with it. But unless Flashforge realise that the true developments in FDM printing have come from the software side rather than just faster hardware, they'll continue to be a third-rate brand rather than the top tier they could be based on printers like this one they've just put out. I want to say thanks for watching, and a huge thanks to our members for continuing to support us. Please consider getting your name up in lights by just signing up down below. Also, if you could just drop a like on this video, even if you didn't like the printer but did like our helpful content, trying to give you better buying advice for 3D printers in the future, drop me a like, but ideally I would love a comment and hit that subscribe button. Thank you very much for your time. Until next time, see you guys, Fohammer out.